Okay, great. We should now be recording. So when I check the chat, I will be looking to the side. So just but I want to start with introductions because here I've been rambling on about snow in Colorado and all that fun stuff. And so I definitely want to let you know who in the heck am I? So I'm Laura Summers. I'm here because I love writing grants and I love having conversations about success in grant writing. This has been a very interesting journey for me through, gosh, over 20 years in education. And I just want to share what I've learned with you and hopefully offer some helpful support and answer your questions. And I hope that this is a conversation today. My approach is not to talk at you, but to actually engage in a conversation with you. So to the best of our ability using our Zoom technology, we'll do that. And the best way currently to ask your questions or to provide feedback would be to put your questions or put your comments in the chat. I'd also like to ask that everyone go ahead and mute. So that's really important as we get started. I'm going to check the sidebar here. I think everyone's doing that pretty well. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And at any time, if you'd like to speak, you'll notice that in your control panel, there is under participants, there is a place where you can do a reaction or you can unmute, and hopefully I'll see that pretty quickly. Otherwise, you can interrupt me. That's quite all right. So I wanted to share with you more about who I am, but while I'm doing that, I actually wanted you to type your name in and your position if you're comfortable with that. And let me know if you're, an experienced grant writer. By all means, please share that, celebrate that. And so I'd be happy to hear how many number of grants you've written and received. And if you know, as we're starting this conversation today, if you know what you'd like to write a grant for, go ahead and put that in the chat as well. Okay, so I don't feel so bad. Winslow Library said it's 27 degrees. So, okay. So you are still warmer than I am, but I know it's nice to know that not everywhere is enjoying the heat. So yes, thank you for sharing your names. And I just love to know who's in the audience. This is probably the hardest thing for me virtually is in a Zoom-like setting. We don't always know who folks are and where you're from and what your background is. I like to differentiate my conversations. And so that's, kind of coming in as that's one of the unknowns as I'm coming in. What I've shared with you so far, just to give you a little bit of background, this is where I live. This is my neighborhood. So I live in downtown Denver. This is Union Station. This is our train station. This is Larimer Square, which is right down the street from where I live. So right now, currently, the street's blocked off so that we can have restaurants, tables in the streets. And it's become this great walking square, literally. It's just a block. But it's been really great for people being able to be outside and enjoying that. And then the third picture is actually a view from my bedroom window. So when the fires, this actually isn't quite as clear a view of the mountains as I probably should have chosen, but just a lovely view that I can look out and see the mountains. And I moved to downtown Denver just a few years ago from a northern city in Colorado so that I could be closer to work. So after years of commuting over an hour, I decided, okay, it's time to be able to be part of the city and the culture and explore in Denver. And so it's been great. I work at the University of Colorado, Denver. And I have been there since 2006. Previous to that, and at the University of Colorado, Denver, I lead the school library program. Previous to that, I was at the University of Northern Colorado, where I led their school library program until I was recruited to Denver, to CU Denver. And then previous to that, I was a school librarian. So really love being part of the library community, and just have loved that's been the majority of my career. But I've also been involved in professional learning and instructional coaching. So you'll see some of the grants that I actually share with you today are across the educational environment. So great to see all the different roles that we have here, and exciting to see those of you that have already received grants. And so at any point, if you have some wisdom to share with us, I always learn from you as well. So I wanted to give you also just a little dose of credibility. I'm aware that anytime someone presents that, you know, we may be very passionate about something, but we also need to share, you know, what our credibility is. And so you can decide if I'm credible enough, and if you want to actually listen to what I have to say. But I have written 11 successful grants, which may not sound like a lot, but then when you look at the total, it's come to $5,470,500 dollars. So I'm pretty jazzed about that. I look at writing grants as a puzzle. I take it on as a contest, almost like a game. And in that perspective, I have a lot of fun. And I don't get too upset then when there's some grants that I miss out on, because I'm just using that as an opportunity to get better. And the ironic part is I didn't plan to write grants in my career. When I was what we called a media specialist, so as a teacher librarian, our role years ago in the 90s was called media specialist. And I was at a community, it was a 6 through 12 school, and we were in the foothills in Boulder County, and we didn't have really good internet. And so as an accident, my first grant was, I'm like, well, I'm going to get us better internet. Well, one of the first lessons I learned in writing a grant is you probably should tell your sponsor, probably should tell your stakeholders what you're doing. So I wrote this grant. It was for over $100,000 for better internet, but I didn't tell my principal I was doing it. So lesson learned, he was very surprised, wasn't prepared to accept the grant, just really didn't expect it. It all worked out well, but that was my accident. So I kind of got excited about that. I'm like, oh, well, I didn't know what I was doing, and I wrote this grant and it worked. So let's keep going, right? So that's my funny first story. So just wanted to share that with you. You can start with any size, but I do recommend usually starting with a small grant. So this is our agenda for this morning. We started with the welcome, and now I'm going to talk about where to start, and then we're going to talk about funding sources and just general tips, and then components, and then we'll talk about next steps. My intended outcomes today are pretty lofty. They're pretty big for an hour presentation. And I like I said, start with a conversation. So I've already taken some time to hope get you to know a little bit more about who I am and why you'd want to welcome me into your space. So I'm not at a hard stop at 10 your time, but I'm, you know, if you need to for any reason, log off. I will be sending a link to this presentation. You'll get all the slides, and you'll also get the recording. So you can go back at any time and listen to this. And then I'll talk a little bit more about additional next steps after this. But this is what my hope is. And I'm going to show you as we go through each of the sections where I hit on these bullets. And I'm not reading them to you because I know that can be annoying at times. So where to start? So I'm going to hit the first outcome by, I want you to brainstorm a project for grant funding and how we go about that. So when you're imagining a project, it's really important to think about what are you trying to accomplish? And how will this idea contribute to your library's vision, mission, and goals? I see that we have, you know, a variety of positions in the chat. I also see that some of you are, part of a school system, and some of you are a public library. That's what I'm in terms of just, checking in on that. And I see that different experiences in terms of success, etc. So some of you may understand this a little more, but it's really important to, as I mentioned at the beginning, not have the accident that I had. To actually talk to your supervisor, talk to your, if you have someone, let's say a director, somebody that will collaborate with you, somebody that will support you in your vision. But also making sure that it matches with what your mission and goals are for your library space. And so thinking about what are the successes in your program and what are the strengths. Maybe it's a particular clientele. Maybe you've done a really good job of attracting in youth or diverse and underrepresented populations. Maybe you really want to, as I mentioned in the beginning, really want to expand your technology, and you really want to decide how you can do that to serve your patrons. So that's also why I ask, who is your target audience? And do you have the capacity, depending on the size of the grant that you're going to go for? So that's why I mentioned starting small. It is amazing that just a small little grant, and I'm going to show you some of those as well, really does help just build your confidence in writing grants, and also builds the success of your program. And so the very last question that I'm going to ask around imagining projects is, are you able to match funds? And you can do this in a variety of ways. So sometimes people think, oh, I literally have to match dollar to dollar. And it actually is that if you think about what your income is, that and your time that you're going to invest in being part of this grant project, that is the equivalent to matching funds. So for example, I had the wonderful opportunity of participating in a professional learning program last week that was funded by a IMLS grant. And so I was really excited about that. And what they asked is, in order to show their contribution, what is it that, our income was, because that's our time. So we were contributing our time / our salary for those 3 days as part of the grant, the funded grant. So I think that's just a good reminder of, and I'll show you some examples when we talk about budget, of what that might look like. So what I'd like is I'd actually like, let's see, it's next page, oops, excuse me. I'd like you to share either your questions, and you can do that by unmuting or in the chat. But I'd also like to hear about some ideas that you currently have. And it's okay if you don't have any ideas, but if you have an idea, it'd be so much fun to hear, and perhaps we can kind of use as an example as we go along. So I'm going to pause here for a moment and let you either type in the chat, or I'll check unmutes. I'll take a sip of water while I'm waiting. Is there anyone that would like to talk? Oh, a story walk project. Okay, I want to hear more about that. And the library podcast. Oh, that's fun. That's a good one. And obviously a podcast is going to be, you can start small and go bigger with that one. So that's great. Scanner software, yep, that makes sense. Oh, nice. The KidCast. That sounds like somebody has experience then with podcasting. So that's another great thing about this conversation, is I hope that you could consider each other kind of a network that you could consider yourselves as partners in this, and that there might be that opportunity to collaborate with each other, to go in on a joint grant. You know, that to me, we're stronger together. And so if there's any opportunity to do that, for example, the grant program that I was part of last week as a participant was in collaboration with Connecticut libraries as well as our Colorado State Library. So we had 2 states that joined. It's a larger network. And to me, that means that we're going to learn that much more from each other. Outreach services, awesome, great. All right, since I'm not anticipating that anyone wants to verbally talk yet, that's fine. I'm going to go on to funding sources and identifying opportunities for grant writing. And this might be a repeat for some of you who have received grants before, but hopefully it won't be too painful to be reminded of these. So in terms of funding sources, once you have an idea, which I'm seeing here, you've got ideas, it's really important that you take your idea and you search for appropriate opportunities. And so what you want to do is you want to actually make a spreadsheet list of funding resources. And that means you're going to think about the size of your grant, you know, who the past recipients are, what their area of interests are. You're going to want to read examples of their successful proposals, and you're going to want to understand their interests. You're also going to want to talk to assigned grant officers if they're available. So I'm going to actually unshare this screen for a moment. This is always, doesn't matter how many times I've been doing this. Whoops. Hold on one sec. Oh, okay, stop share there. I wanted to show you some other examples. So I'm like, I've got to just be able to stop sharing for just a moment and then bring it up for you. Okay, one second. I apologize. We're all getting used to these new ways of presenting, aren't we? All right, now I can share my screen again. So I wanted to show you an example of what this you know, slideshow could look like. Not slideshow, excuse me, spreadsheet could look like. And this is just a simple spreadsheet that was used. I partner with other programs to write grants. And so we were doing a search to fund English as a second language programming. And so we were looking through to see what was available. And so we had the title and we had the link and then what the deadline was, how much the funding amount was, whether or not, you know, how many were awarded, and then whether or not, you know, other notes. So for example, we found out really quickly that this particular grant wasn't available in Colorado. It was only for North Carolina. So obviously that was out. And then we highlighted some that we really felt like we could really invest our time in and should explore more. And, you know, some are from, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but some were from nonprofits, from foundations. A lot of people, you know, Walton, as in Walmart, they have some grants. There's some federal grants in terms of grants.gov. There's the U.S. Department of Education. The Spencer Foundation is another popular one to look at. William T. Grant, especially if you're looking at outreach. And so those, you know, we just started brainstorming, and this was really where we wanted to just collect. And because we had a group working together, sharing a Google spreadsheet was really the best way to go. Let me go to another screen now. My my Zoom menu is in it's like in the wrong spot for my mouse, so I apologize for that. So I do provide that link for you so that you will be able to actually just view a copy of that spreadsheet, and you can make a copy of it and you know, try your you know, redo it and make it your own. So I'm more than happy for that. The other piece I wanted to share with you, so I'm sharing another screen now, was kind of what I talked about here about the officers. And so I'm looking at, and I don't know if any of you have applied and received a IMLS grant. They are one of my favorites for the library community. And I just wanted to share the number of different grant programs they have here. So that to me is, oh, it's, sorry, it's paused. I don't know why it's paused. Oh, it's sharing again. Sorry about that. They have a number of different grants that you can actually consider. The one that I applied to and did receive was this Laura Bush 21st Century Librarian Program. And when I select that, I wanted to give you just a little more information about that. So it shows the application for 2021, because the deadline was October 2nd for 2020. So you can actually click on the link and find out more information about what they're seeking, seeking in terms of applications. They wanted initial proposals by the 2nd, and then they invite, once they review those initial proposals, they invite you for a full proposal due in March. So there's people right now, and maybe you're one of them, who has reached, has written a proposal and is now waiting to see, will I be invited to submit a full proposal. And this is, they fund grants up to 100,000, and then they have national forum grants that are up to 150. Look at this, project grants up to $1 million. So this is really, when you look at a federal opportunity, they're very supportive of libraries and museums. And if you can partner as a network of libraries, or a library in a museum, or a library in a community center, they're very welcoming to those as well. And so if you look here as well, when I talked about budget, we talked about cost sharing. And so it's are you able to show that you're able to meet and match the funds, and how you do that. So this kind of gives you an idea of what they're looking for in that, which is nice to see. And they'll actually, with IMLS, they'll pay for time. So if you're the coordinator of the grant, if you're the project manager, they'll pay for your time that it takes to work on the grant, which is nice for organizations and libraries, because then they can actually have someone else take over the tasks that you're not able to do. Usually the grant period's 1 to 2 years. When I received mine, it was a 2-year grant, and I was able to ask for a one-time extension. So that was nice as well. And then this is what I wanted to show you about the contacts. So a lot of times we think, oh, they don't really want us to bother them, or, maybe we shouldn't, that'll be like, annoy them. But no, they want you to. They want you to reach out. They give you a list here and kind of say, these are the people that you would, really talk to, and just see if you have a viable idea. And they'll be really straightforward and honest with you. Is this an idea that they would consider investing in? The grant that I received was to provide professional learning and coaching for school librarians to become culturally responsive educators. And so the librarians that applied and were accepted went through a semester-long, paid-for professional learning opportunity. They received professional learning credit for that. and the training to be a culturally responsive educator. And then after they went through the professional learning, they received in-library coaching around how they were implementing the culturally responsive practices within their libraries. And the evaluation was relatively simple. It was a pre-post survey around culturally responsive practices and self-efficacy, because one of the things that I had discovered in my research is that oftentimes we don't try new ideas when we don't feel self-efficacious. And so self-efficacy is a really important marker in any type of adult learning that we want to pursue. So this is where I'm also here today to hopefully provide you with a little more confidence and some self-efficacy around writing grants. And the best way to do it is to practice and to dive in. But obviously, hopefully these little pointers will also help you as well. And then here is the grant program webinar. Oftentimes organizations like the IMLS or Spencer Foundation or National Science Foundation, they will have live webinars like we're having right now, where they talk about things that they want to see in your application. So even though you've missed the deadline for this year, know that it'll be back and you can prepare and you can get ready for it. And you have almost, a little less than a year to actually get ready for this grant. So it's always helpful to kind of plan ahead. So let me see if I can, if there's any questions. I'm gonna pause my screen here. And let me pause for a moment, either through chat or through audio. Let me know if you have questions so far. Hopefully I haven't put you all yet to sleep. That's not the idea. I get really excited about this. So if I need to re-explain everything, anything, let me know. One of the things that I also talk about in writing grants is that you're speaking to a novice in that area. So your program officers, those that are reviewing your grant, especially if it's for a community foundation, they aren't necessarily going to have the same understanding of library services that you have. And so it's really important to think about how are you keeping your language more universal and avoiding professional jargon or very clearly defining things. So that's another, just something that I'm always really aware of when I'm writing a grant. So more to come. Let me find my screen again. This is okay. I found my screen. Now I have to find you all. Going back to sharing. If anything, my presenting today should help you to be more comfortable knowing that sometimes things don't go as planned. This is the first time my PowerPoint or my Google slide deck has not worked as it's supposed to. So you're actually viewing a PDF copy of my presentation. So I'm going to scroll along here. All right, so when you get this PowerPoint or this slide deck, you'll get it as a PDF and you will be able to click on each of these sources. So you'll see here, I did put the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So you'll be able to access their page, just what I've just shown you now. You'll also be able to go to grants.gov, the US Department of Education. And if you're a public library, please know the school libraries want to partner with you. So do not be afraid to go to the Department of Education to look for large grants that would allow for district partnerships, like I said, after school programs, community programs. Learning takes all forms, and we especially know in libraries that informal self-directed learning is a really important part of all this, especially with the Department of Education. If you're looking for any makerspace type grants, that would be an area. They are doing more and more research around that project-based learning. And so there might be a grant that comes up through the Department of Education. Also understand we're in a changing time. So we're, you know, on the verge of an election. So we don't always know how that might change the dynamics of the Department of Education or what grants will be available because of federal funding. So it's always a kind of a wait and see, but start with the possibilities. Start with your interests, your passions. There is someone out there that will sponsor you. And it's just, you know, sometimes it does take more time than other times, but it is possible. And, you know, yes, I know that it's just me saying that, but I really want you to, you know, follow your passions in whatever area and know that there's a multitude of sponsors. And sometimes it might take a few, maybe it'll be a few smaller community grants to get to exactly what you need. But you can always phase a project, and you can always share with sponsors what that phased approach would be. And so you can be quite honest and say, you know, I need this much for phase 1. And in order to go to phase 2, I need this much. And for phase 3, I need this much. So gosh, there's so many opportunities. We could have so many different conversations around even planning for a phased approach. But I just wanted to make sure you had these. So when you get this slide deck, which you'll get it shortly after the presentation, Anne Marie's going to send it out for me, you'll be able to click on all those. The other areas I wanted you to think about were associations, foundations, and nonprofits. So I've listed a few, and you know, there's a mix here. There's a mix between public libraries as well as school libraries. And so there's ALA, which also has the AASL, but I went ahead with the big picture with the ALA as association. There's the Council on Library and Information Resources. There's the International Literacy Association, and I would also target, if you went to the International Literacy Association, I would also look at your state literacy association. I did not do my homework in that area, but like, for example, there's a Colorado chapter for the International Literacy Association called the Colorado Literacy Association. So I'm assuming there's an Arizona chapter. And so you might want to check there. The Public Library Association, once again, I would advocate for partnerships, but you know that they're available for if you're looking at public library projects. The Pilcrow Foundation has to do with materials and putting you know, books in the hands of patrons. So I thought that was an interesting one to kind of explore. And then especially if you're looking at youth, I would check out the Scholastic Library Grants. And then hopefully, I put this in here. I'm not an expert on Arizona, not claiming to be. So I wanted you to actually share if you know of other Arizona state funding sources, because these are just 3 that I was able to you know, easily find. And I'm hoping that you know of others, especially those of you that have received grants in the past. So if you want to add them to the chat, we can also share the chat in this follow-up email, and so that you can help each other out in that way. So feel free to put those in the chat if you'd like. All right, I've mentioned some of my general tips, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. But I have to say the largest component is just allowing for that appropriate amount of time. It is not too soon to be looking for a grant that's 6 to 8 months out. Even like I mentioned, the Laura Bush grant is a year away. You know, I'm already looking at that for next year because I'm like, you know, you got to plan and you'd need time. And I think oftentimes we don't give ourselves enough time. And so if we can project, you know, kind of time manage, it's really important to just not try to rush it. I have seen in my own work when I've tried to rush something and then I go back and I find spelling errors or, you know, words I would have used differently, sentences, sentence structure, things that I missed. And I was like, oh, you know, there's, I've gotten lucky. I've gotten lucky because occasionally there'll be a mistake and it'll still be funded, but, you know, not always. And so that's, I think it's just important to take a breath and give us the time that we need, and to make sure we also have the time to address all the criteria. This is not a place to be creative. This is really following the suggested format, being aware of page limits. They will kick the proposal out. You know, my IMLS grant was, the narrative was 10 pages. It couldn't go over. A 2-page resume is what they mean when they say, you know, no more than 2 pages. And you may have a lot more to share, and that's where you have to just cut things down, and you have to be really succinct and really prioritize what you want to say. Also, you want to have time to have a colleague review the draft proposal. And then, as I've mentioned, collaboration and partnerships also really important, but also understanding with that comes some norming that you have to be comfortable with, because it's not always easy working with a large number of people. And so you have to be really comfortable with what are each other's spaces and what are each other's strengths. So that was pretty quick, and you can, here's a little comedy here. It's all plotted out, it's all in my head, and now I just have to write it out. And so that brings us to our components. So if you noticed, two of the outcomes also were to investigate the steps and then to review some successful examples. So I definitely want to make sure we spend time on this. These are the typical components. I just put them in here kind of as an organizer. You'll see this in any application where you're asked to do these different things. And so I'm going to cover the majority of them, some more in depth than others. This is probably the most important. The statement of need is the most important part of your narrative. And this is where you describe your significance. What's compelling about what you're proposing, why that topic would be worthy of support. This is what I talked about earlier. You know, think like a novice, avoid the jargon, using data to actually support your statement, and then also using any literature, research. And we may not always think of ourselves as researchers, but as practitioners. You know, there are professional, you know, journals that you might be reading, just different data sources that you've looked at that can support your need. Even something from a community newspaper, really saying this is why we have this need, and this is what this is what I've read, and this is what the numbers are showing us. And then obviously thinking about your target audience. That's also a very important piece, because the sponsors want to they want to make sure that you know who you're serving, right? It's just it's really common sense. And so this can be a lot of fun, but this is probably one of the areas that causes the most stress as well. So let me share with you, I'm going to share a couple of examples with you. So I'm taking one, let's see here. Let's share again. I'm sharing with you this is actually not a library grant. This is a school district grant, but I really felt like it kind of pulled up some things that were really related, and I felt practical. So here's a letter. So this is when we talked about a cover letter. This was a grant written in 2013 for a school district in Fort Collins. And the letter basically was explaining what the grant was about. And Laura? This was, yes.
We can't see this.
Pause. Thank you for speaking up. Oh dear. Resume sharing. I think when I switched to the to that page, it stopped. Thank you so much for sharing that. So this is the executive summary. And so what we were trying to do is this was around math and instructional coaching. So something to keep in mind is, as a librarian, you can support your colleagues by helping them with grants, knowing that you can also, as part of that, there might be resources for the library that end up coming into play with the grant. So in this case, we were growing math learners and leaders. And so there were texts associated with this grant that would need to be funded and would actually be housed in the library. So I think that was a really important part, even though the main part of this grant was around the instructional coaching. So you'll see here that in the summary, we approach our goals, and you're going to get a copy of these things. So I realize that the font might be small, but I wanted to give you a sense of what this all looks like. And this was the statement of need. So this was called, in this particular grant, they used the verbiage needs assessment. And so there was the general statement, the schools, identifying and recruiting. So here's, in this case, not patrons, but coaches and teachers. So you'll see that it really, gosh, that was about 3 pages. And then you go into the literature review. So this was where we did some research around successful coaching practices and included them within this literature review. So, and then we also included the goals. So this is one example, and let me share a different one with you because I think that's also important. Yay. It says it's sharing. This was the assessment of need from the IMLS grant. And so you'll see here that this is from a 10-page narrative. And so this is the introduction in terms of the assessment of need. And then this is describing the impact, what will actually happen if this grant is successful. And then I mentioned serving diverse and underrepresented patrons. In this case, I was marking the diversity in the different school districts. And my call to action was that school libraries need to be equipped to work with English language learners, as well as understanding cultural differences that may impact students' learning and social interactions within a school library. And so that was my primary question, was how are diverse and underrepresented students' needs being met through school library services in Colorado? And that was a question that I wasn't seeing addressed in current research at the time. So I wanted to share that was just a 2-page example, 3-page example of a statement of need. And then let me go back. Any questions while I'm wanting to find this for you? Okay, I am going to keep going then. this was where I was talking, this was my other attempt to be funny, was I think you should be more explicit here in step 2. I don't know if you can see that on the screen, but kind of brings up that sometimes we aren't explicit. And so that's usually when our grants aren't funded, is because there's a lack of understanding. So that the goals and objectives, what I have found time and time again is that if you're able to write a SMART goal, that's what the funders want to see. They want to know that it's measurable, and they want to know that it's time-based, and that you have some way of determining that. I actually, what I'm pulled from is a small business example here, because I really liked how they showed, it's still sharing, great. They give you some examples here. So these may not always be, they aren't library examples, so they may not feel as relevant, but I think they're transferable, because this particular person wanted to write a business book. So just really explained how many pages it was. They're going to write 1 chapter a month. Why is this attainable? What's relevant about it? And how is it time-based? And so this project was going to be completed in 10 months. So I think that was, this is just a few different examples. I'll include a few others if that would be helpful, just because I want to make sure that you feel like you have a good grasp of that. And I have some previous presentations that I can share the slide deck for on that. Okay. Methods. So this is the section where you explain what's going to take place over time and what the timeline is. And so this is an example of a small grant. This grant is only paying for presenters for monthly webinars. And so I am partnering with our state library to actually, and this is a current grant, where we have a monthly webinar. And so I time out, I go through the entire year sharing what the timeline is going to be. It is possible that the timeline will shift at some point. And usually a sponsor does not need to know that. They just need to know that you kept to your schedule in a general sense. If there's going to be a significant shift, that's when the sponsor is going to want to know. A few years ago, received a Gates grant. And so it was for a large professional learning program. In that case, we found we had money left at the end of the year. So we asked for an extension. So we had to rewrite our timeline to enable us to continue using the grant funds and not having to return them to the sponsor. So that's where timelines can get you into trouble, because if things don't get spent in the manner that you think they're going to, the sponsor can come back at the end of the year and say, sorry, this was only a 1-year grant, you're done. I've been really fortunate in that has never happened to me, but you have to be prepared to explain yourself and to explain why you need more time and why you, for lack of a better word, why you deserve to keep the money and keep using it. And so it does help at that point to be able to provide a progress report and to talk about how the program is actually the success of your program and what the data is to show its success. And so it could be, if you're writing a grant around equipment, sometimes that might feel hard to do. But I would say, in talking about your evidence of success, how many patrons are using the equipment? If you have a makerspace in your library, how many people are creating projects? You could do a very brief, and this is obviously when we're not remote, but do a survey as the patrons come in to use it. Have them just briefly share, how easy was the equipment to use? What did they use it for? Little tiny things like that that will be enough data to show the success and to show the progress. So I think that's helpful to see. That one. Okay. So the other piece of this is building your budget. So you really want to make sure that you include these components in your budget. So you'll get a copy of this so you can actually use it. But even all the way down to how much do you think copies and printing will be? In this case, where more and more is online, what might be virtual that you need to support? So is it an internet connection? Is it the software? Is it the, for example, the Zoom platform? Is it your connectivity, your broadband internet? Those types of things can be included in the grant. I wanted to share a couple of examples with you. For example, here is this very small grant. You'll see here that there's a stipend for each presenter, and that's all that we were asking to be paid for. And the reason why a grant was written for this is that I didn't have the funding in my program budget. This is the library program at CU Denver. I wasn't able to pay our presenters. So often I'm asking presenters to, just to do it for free. And so I really wanted to make sure that I could compensate them for their time. So I gave them 2 hours of prep time. I planned on an hour and a half of facilitation, and I was spacing that out over 8 presentations in the year. And then I also, wanted to include any administrative costs for processing the presenters' paperwork, because there is someone on the back end that also has to do that. So that was the contributing piece there. And then we had what was I considered in-kind contributions. And these are pieces that I've taken on myself. So I've included it in my day-to-day activities. And oftentimes we don't think about that. We don't think about what our time is worth. And so we have administrative costs for recruiting and establishing, agreements and any pre-webinar meetings, and then what it takes to moderate the webinar, and then any marketing that might be part of that. So you can kind of see there how that works. And here's another, this is a professional learning budget. And so this just shows you other ways to calculate. And like I said, I'll share all this with you. This is grayed out because we weren't allowed to use grant funds for space or food. So you'll see here that we had to cover those costs ourselves, but that we obviously couldn't put them in the grant. And so I think that's important to understand too. So I am coming up on about the hour. I have a few more things I want to talk about, but in case anyone has a hard stop at 10, I just want to pause here for another moment to give you an opportunity to ask questions. Great. Okay. Thank you. So part of the evaluation is, there's different ways that you can evaluate. And so I actually, in the resources you're going to receive after this, I give you an example of a framework for program evaluation from the University of Kansas. I give you a logic model example, as well as an article about how logic models work. I can share this with you. Still screen, awesome. So this shows you that in the IMLS grant that I wrote, I was including what the resources were, as well as what their activities were, and then what their short-term outcomes would be, as well as their intermediate outcomes, and then their long-term outcomes. And so sponsors of grants, they like to see that you're thinking through short, medium, and long-range plans, and they like to see what that impact is. I also mentioned that a survey was done pre and post, and that was our mechanism for evaluation. So I think, and then there were I did conduct interviews as well as observations during the coaching phase. So it was kind of a multi-dimensional evaluation. Dissemination is just really can take on all different forms. So sometimes it's saying that you're going to publish. So as a result of that grant, I had an article that I published in a school library publication. It wasn't the school library journal. That's why I paused when I said that, because I'm like, oh, it's really a name, but it wasn't a journal. As well as presentations that you would do. I ended up presenting at AASL and Colorado Association of Libraries and at TESOL, which is, now I'm going to space what that means. I'm embarrassed because I should know what TESOL means, but it was a English as a second language. It was a presentation for their association. And it's, you're going to say, this is how I'm going to get the word out. And this is what we think the results will be. So obviously I was able, and maybe not obviously, but I was able to show that professional learning and coaching does make a difference, and that it did increase the use of culturally responsive instructional practices in the libraries, and that there was more self-efficacy. And so people didn't have as many doubts about what they were able to do, even if they were new to thinking about instructional practices in that way, because you meet everybody where they're at. And so it's important to also just describe any materials or results that are going to come from your grant work. I shared a couple of the budget examples, which you'll also receive. And then the last component is qualifications. They do want to know if you can highlight any experiences related to your grant proposal. If you are new to grant writing and you don't have any previously funded grants, that's okay. What you're going to talk about your research, your areas of interest, what you've looked up. They're going to be okay with that. They're just wanting to see, where are you at? What are you coming to the table with? So that is where, if you can partner with somebody who's written a grant before, that always helps. That's where that collaboration is helpful. Or if you can explain that, you're managing a library program, or you're, coordinating a program, or whatever it is that you can in terms of your organization, your ability to manage something, that is also very helpful. And this is another funny that I had to put in there. Sometimes there's a few strings attached to a grant, meaning that the funders could go back and say, we want you to change this, or we'll give you this much instead of the full amount that you asked for. That's common, and it's just part of that negotiated component of that. And so anytime they're asking to negotiate, I'm more than happy to listen, because I'm like, some money is better than no money, right? All right, so these are all the different components. And I want to make sure that, I think we've touched base on some of them. The one we didn't talk about was the appendices, and the appendices are what happens at the end of the grant. And they usually contain any additional forms or details, any models that you're going to use, things that didn't fit in the narrative, because usually there's a page limit for the narrative, but usually they'll allow you to add on into the appendices. Okay, next steps. So in an hour, it's just not enough time to cover the finer details of grant writing. And so I wanted to extend my consulting. I am offering you a 15-minute follow-up phone call, a Zoom presentation, or correspondence through email to really make sure that you have increased confidence in writing a grant proposal, to make sure that your questions get answered one-on-one, and just really, hoping to develop your skills. If that means at any stage, and this is at any stage, let me find it here. Yeah, there it is. Any stage in your proposal write, if it's to go through a brainstorming activity, if it's to check your statement of need and offer suggestions, if it's to review your entire proposal that you've done, anything that'll help, just help to foster that self-efficacy. It's really important to me that you feel like you are building that practice, because that's what it takes. It takes practice. And so I provided my email here, and I'd love to hear from each and every one of you. Like I said, these are one-on-ones. They're set up at your convenience. This is an offer that stands. So you can come back to me a year from now when you're working on a grant that's due next year and say, hey, I was part of that presentation. You know, would you mind reviewing this? Or would you mind brainstorming or answering questions? Or what was it that you said about this? Or do you have an example of this type of budget? You know, I learned so much by talking with each and every one of you. And so what I don't want this to be is just this one time me speaking at you for an hour and you not getting anything in return. So it's really, really important to me that you feel like you can reach out and that you can ask follow-up questions, because that's how we keep growing. That's how we keep learning. You know, do I have all the answers? By no means, no. But I feel like I've been successful enough in the grants I've written that I can share additional resources with you to meet your particular needs for your library. I do also include some resources. So when you receive this, you'll see additional resources, just general tips that might be helpful. And then I also want to extend another invite to you. We have, as I talked about this grant project, these monthly webinars. And the idea behind Shine a Light, these are webinars to spotlight innovative practices in primarily school libraries. You know, they might extend out to public libraries as well. But each month we're offering a free webinar. And if you go to this link here, you'll be able to sign up and receive the webinar link, the invite, and then as well as you can watch if you can't make it live, you can watch the recording. Last month we had a school librarian who's in a smaller community in northern Colorado. She talked about her role as a coach. And so oftentimes as a librarian, we don't think of how much we coach people. And so even if it's informal, she just talked about ideas around that. This coming in November, we'll have a high school librarian who's talking about his makerspace. And so, you know, these topics may or may not be of interest, but I always like to just extend the invite because during this time, we really do want to shine a light on the amazing work that librarians are doing and are hoping that this can extend. Like I said, it was a very small grant, and I'm hoping that this is phase 1. And so in a phase 2 approach, I'd actually be able to get more funding and have this be an ongoing part of my community service because I was inspired. I was inspired by a librarian this summer who just spoke with such warmth and made everyone feel so much better during this complex time. And so I'm aware that, you know, we have a lot going on and anything we can do to support each other, because I really do believe that, you know, we're stronger together. So that is what I have for you today. And I really, you know, thank you for your time and thank you for putting up with my wonky technology. I'm going to have to research why the slide deck didn't want to show up full screen. It would have been a lot easier. But we make it work, right? We are resilient, and I just appreciate, you know, you taking time out of your busy day to be here with me. Are there any general questions? I will stop sharing and take it back to the gallery view so that I can actually see if anyone wants to say anything or ask anything, or if anyone has any comments in the chat. Well, you have my email. So I really, really hope that you'll follow, take me up on my offer, and reach out one-on-one, reach out and, let me know what, about your particular topic. And if we were in a face-to-face, we'd be able to kind of do some breakouts. So, know that I definitely want to hear from you, and I'm so excited, and I want to celebrate with you when you get your grant. We can do a virtual, um, party, just, it's so energizing. And it just, like I said, you guys are doing great work, and anything we can do to increase your services and your self-efficacy is really, 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 really important to me. So thank you so much. I will hang out for a few minutes just in case anything comes up. But otherwise, I'm going to stop the recording and wish you all a great and wonderful day.